Good seeing you again. Hey. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting, I'm Steve Benjamin. I serve as the Senior Advisor to the President. I run the Office of Public Engagement here at the White House. It's a real honor to be with such an incredibly diverse group of leaders here today, including we have several from the blind community join us in person and virtually. And for those of you who might need a visual description of who I am, I'm a very handsome black man. About 6'4". If you ever heard of a guy named Denzel Washington, think of that plus, plus, and you'll get an idea. Many of you know the Office of Public Engagement serves as the front door to the White House, the place where we greet civil society and serve as a place where not only do we share the wonderful successes of the Biden-Harris administration, working with some amazing leaders from across the country, but we also serve as a place where we do what my grandmother would say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You listen twice as much as you talk. You take in good, thoughtful, constructive criticism. And by working together, we do great things together. And this is an example today of what we're doing. I had the wonderful opportunity to serve as mayor of Columbia, South Carolina for 12 years. I didn't know you were here, Kimberly. For 12 years. And as mayor, obviously, I know Secretary Buttigieg will tell you the same, you really get to see the impact you have on your constituents every day. You're proximate to what you're doing. So whether it's fixing potholes, people would say, or picking up the trash, or if you're doing the real work of pandemic response or dealing with a natural disaster, or even the work like we're talking about today of contributing to improving the public square, where citizens gather. And we have an opportunity to all live up to our full potential by making thoughtful policy, data influence, human influence decisions as to how we gather. That's how you get things done well. And I brought that perspective to my leadership of the Office of Public Engagement and a dedicated team of liaisons who work with community leaders at all levels to make sure that the diverse perspectives and localized needs of people across America informing the work of President Biden and Vice President Harris. We don't often get to see that one-to-one action to impact up here at White House, or I dare say in Washington, D.C. We get to see it, we see it through your perspective and the work that each and every one of you do to uplift older adults, people differently abled, and certainly with our veterans as well. So during today's convening on protecting the safety, rights, and dignity of air travelers with disabilities, so whether you're gathered here today or if you're tuning in from around the country, we hope to galvanize action that translates to concrete progress for all. That's how we make democracy deliver for everyone. I often tell people that activism without action is just a conversation. We need action. So I'm very honored to be here today and pleased to be here today to celebrate a win, a big win with fierce advocates outside of and within government to ensure that when a person with a disability, including a person who uses a mobility device, flies in an airplane, that they can do so in safety and with dignity. I'm honored to be here. I'm joined by my good friend, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, someone I admire, Senator Tammy Duckworth, leaders from the Department of Transportation, including today's moderator, Disability Policy Advisor Kelly Buckland. Also certainly want to take a moment to acknowledge our Representative Steve Cohen, the ranking member of the House Aviation Subcommittee. I'm not sure if Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, was planning to join us, but certainly co-chair of the Bipartisan Disabilities Caucus, Representative Garrett Graves, chair of the House Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, Representative Rick Larson, a ranking member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. I love to say that the two most powerful words in the English language are thank you. My wife always tells me that actually, yes, ma'am, but I still believe they're thank you. So I just want to say thank you all so much, not just for joining us today, but for the incredible work that you're doing in partnership with the administration, but more so for the people of this great country. With that, I'll turn it over to my friend Pete Buttigieg.
Thanks very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank Mayor Benjamin for his work, as only a former mayor can, connecting the entire country to the White House, and that's work that requires being in many places at once. So we know, Mayor, that you've got to be on your way. But thanks so much for everything that you're doing. I really need to begin with a whole set of thank yous, because so many have been part of getting to today, and of frankly making our department better and better able to serve the entire country. It begins with the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris. President Biden has set a tone about making sure that our work benefits all. Vice President Harris has gotten personally engaged in this work. I was here a few months ago as we celebrated the final rule increasing the accessibility of airplane lavatories, and since then have been able to visit airports around the country getting new accessibility upgrades, and have really been able to show the impact of values in action through the work that's been led by the President and Vice President and the whole team here at the White House. I want to acknowledge Senator Duckworth, who has been such a leader and such an important voice broadly on aviation policy and safety, and specifically on aviation and disability policy and safety. We're so lucky to have you here, especially as you're doing a lot of other important work, including leading the charge on protecting the right to IVF in this country. So thank you for sharing your time with us. As Steve mentioned, but I just want to reiterate, having leaders like Representative Cohen, Representative Larson, Representative Graves here demonstrating the bipartisan commitment to good disability policy and dignified and safe air travel says a lot, means a lot. We really value working with you in Congress on these issues. And Kelly Buckland, seated to my left, our USDOT Disability Policy Advisor, who has brought policy expertise, deep connections in the community, and lived experience to help make us all better at our jobs. So thank you, and really appreciate what you'll be doing for a popular man in this room. And I got to go around with you more often. That's great. And along with Kelly, just a phenomenal team across USDOT who did so much work to get us here. And most importantly of all, this community of advocates and community leaders who have helped make what in so many areas dating back to the gains that have been made through the ADA itself and the Air Carrier Access Act and everything done since have really helped transform what Americans believe is possible to get from things that seem impossible to things that are well understood and no one would have it any other way. And that's especially important now because we are assessing what transportation means in this country and the basic elemental fact that your daily routine, your relationship with the economy and with your family, all of it depends on your ability to get to where you need to be. And when somebody cannot travel because somebody else has decided that it's too hard to accommodate them, the world shrinks. And importantly, it shrinks for that would-be traveler, and it shrinks for everybody else. Everybody who would benefit from having that traveler with them, whether it is for a family gathering or whether it is for a board meeting. And we know that we can do better. Despite a lot of progress, transportation remains inaccessible for too many, and that is certainly true in aviation. I've heard so many stories from friends, from advocates, from many people in this room about injuries to damage to wheelchairs, injuries to people's dignity, and sometimes injuries to people's person as part of the travel experience. One memorable remark of many from a public meeting we convened was somebody saying that they were made to feel like a piece of luggage and so decided to no longer fly. And when something like that takes place, that, in my view, even if the first thing you see might be an inadequate airline practice, the reality is behind that is an inadequate regulatory framework. And today we have a chance to change that. So I'm thrilled to be here with advocates and public servants who worked so hard and for so long in advancing accessibility, to be here to officially announce our proposed rule on ensuring safe and accessible air travel. we're going to get into a full discussion of this. I'll just highlight a few high points. The first, the proposed rule requires much stronger training, annual training, and practical training for staff who handle wheelchairs or physically lift people. Secondly, the proposed rule makes clear that damaging or delaying the return of a wheelchair is automatically a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, making it subject to a fine. And a third point, the proposed rule requires airlines to provide passengers the option of using their preferred vendor to repair or replace their wheelchair if it gets damaged. Great example of that's something that might seem technical to those who did not have that lived experience, but talking to those who do, beginning to understand how different that can make the timeline and the ancillary costs involved. So this is a big deal. It really traces back to a public forum we held in March of 2022 on keeping people with disabilities and the mobility equipment that they depend on safe when flying. We had about 1,000 people participate in that conversation, and the insights that were shared then and since really were the foundation of today's proposed rulemaking. I do just want to make clear, this is the proposed rule. We think it's good because it reflects a lot of that input, but during this open comment period, we need to hear from the community. If the provisions look just right, please say so. If they need to be adjusted, if you think there need to be changes, please say so. That input is vital to getting this over the finish line and to changing experiences for so many air travelers around the country and ultimately around the world. So with that, thank you again for the chance to be here, and I'm really excited for our conversation. Kelly, over to you. Sorry,
Yeah.
Senator.
No, it's okay. I'm going to keep mine short. I got a couple of sentences, which is to thank the Secretary for holding this event. I think this is really important. To my former colleagues in the House, thank you for being here and your leadership on all of this. And really, this proposed rule is so critically important. As someone who does travel with a wheelchair, I can't tell you how many times I've seen my own assistive devices and others broken, and people don't realize that this is a part of my body. If this is broken, you've broken my legs. And to really change that mental thought among people so that the regulatory framework is critically important. People who travel with mobility devices deserve better, and under this rule, once it's finalized, they will get better. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Ali?
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I'm Kelly Buckland. I'm the Disability Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Transportation, advising the Secretary. So I have the honor and the pleasure of facilitating a fireside chat with two of my heroes here, and to be with all of you. I'm really excited to be with you today. This is a big deal, as the Secretary said, so, and we do want to hear your input, but first we're going to have this conversation. So I'd like to begin today's discussion with a twofold question. So for both of you, if you could talk about what inspired you to become an advocate for accessible transportation.
Defer to Senator to start.
Well, before being wounded, I never thought about it. And I was a traveler my whole life, and it's a lifestyle that I enjoy and I want to do with my children who are 5 and 9. Once I became disabled, I was very, very fortunate, number one, that I made it home, but number two, that I got to meet the great Marka Bristow and Judy Heumann, two amazing ladies who are no longer with us, but I feel that I helped, along with so many of us in this room, carry on their work, and they taught me about what it means to have a new life with a disability and how we need to advocate for better access for everyone. And so really it's a combination of my own lived experiences, but also learning from those two amazing women and trying to carry, the access that I have now, I only have because of them. I can roll through the through the Capitol and cast a vote on the floor of the Senate only because they crawled up the steps so that I could have the American with Disabilities Act and be here today. So we're just carrying on that work that they began, and hopefully, we'll just keep passing the baton forward until everyone has equal access. And Kelly, you've been part of that fight all along as well. Thank you.
For me, it's really been hearing the voices of people for whom this just makes or breaks their travel experience. And of course, Kelly, you've done a lot to bring those voices into the US DOT. The process is designed to bring those voices forward. I learned a lot about this during my own campaign. Members of our staff who had this lived experience and just did things that you just don't think about until you or somebody you care about has that experience. For example, the fact that when something happens to your wheelchair during a flight or during a trip, that problem doesn't end when your trip ends. It follows you home, especially if you have a custom wheelchair and don't have the means to have a backup ready to go. Things like that are so important to understand. The other thing has been the growing awareness, as I think many people in my what sometimes called the sandwich generation have, where we've got parents that were helping navigate life choices and kids, is realizing that anybody who is not part of the disability community today may well, as a matter of fact, likely will age into disability. And so this is something that concerns everybody. And better understanding that, I think, has helped us make better policy decisions. But it always starts and ends with those who have the lived experience, who can tell us, this is what it takes, this is what it needs. And without this, not only do we not get to have the same experience as others, but we don't get to contribute, and you're missing out.
That's a perfect segue, Mr. Secretary, to the next question, which is, what are some of the key challenges that older Americans, people with disabilities, and veterans face in accessing transportation, and how have you worked to address these challenges?
So this is where the agenda of our entire departmental approach to this comes in, and it's the rulemaking, of course, is an example that we're very excited about today. But we know that it's also a matter of the physical conditions of the spaces that people are asked to navigate. I think for many Americans, seeing the curb cuts has helped them begin to understand how this is something that makes nobody worse off, actually makes a lot of people better off, both those who are wheelchair users and those who are not. But it's just one example of how physical spaces can be more navigable. Often, one of the barriers to doing something about that has been funding, which is why we're so excited about being able to put the funding to work from the infrastructure package to get these things done. And airports is a great example. We've been able to announce improvements at airports around the country that have made the concourse or the bathrooms or the entry to those airports more accessible. And of course, aviation is just one part of it. I think later on we'll probably have a chance to talk about what's going on in transit, mostly through Senator Duckworth's leadership when it comes to better streetscapes and complete streets where we can have vehicles and bicycles and pedestrians, wheelchairs, and small businesses for that matter, peacefully coexist as a good street ought to be, knowing that people face obstacles and challenges to navigating the form of streets that we have inherited. This is just to take a few examples. But again, I want to turn to Senator Duckworth, who has brought her experience to this in so many important ways.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, let me just say that I have to commend you for in Chicago, our transit authority, Dorval Carter, the president, came up with what we call the ASAP Act, which is to make Chicago's mass transit system accessible. I can't write the L in Chicago because I never know if the particular stop has an elevator or doesn't have an elevator, if that elevator is working or not. And he began this project, and he said, and he was very proud to show it to me, because in 25 years, this is going to be done. And I said, so a half century after the passage of the ADA, that's not good enough. I said, well, what do you need? He goes, well, we need funding. And so then I took that idea and worked it into the bipartisan infrastructure deal, but it was really the secretary who took, I showed him the idea, and he ran with it. And has been a huge champion for the ASAP Act as part of the bipartisan infrastructure deal. So thank you for that, because it's going to make a difference in everyday lives. And then the two bills that are, two things that are in this year's FAA reauthorization I'm very proud of is the Mobile Act, which is actually one that helps people help themselves. It's going to require airlines to tell you how large their cargo hold is on the aircraft that you're about to fly on, because you can actually, if you're on a commuter airline, get on an aircraft and your wheelchair won't fit. And it gets put on a different flight, and when you land at the other end, they're like, oh, your wheelchair is going to catch up with you. So this is a way for the consumer to look and say, oh, wait, I'm not going to book myself on that aircraft because the cargo hold is not big enough. That's in this FAA's reauthorization bill in the Senate side. And then the other is more on the FAA, which is the EVAC Act, which is going to require the FAA, when they conduct aircraft evacuation drills, to use real-world standards. The current standards date to the 1960s. And when the last one was done, they met the standard of evacuating an aircraft in 60 seconds. I'm sorry, in 90 seconds. But there was nobody under the age of 18, nobody over 60, No carry-on luggage, nobody with a disability, nobody that didn't speak English, and nobody that didn't have a cognitive or a vision disability. So it's like, well, that's not realistic. Let's look at what Japan Airline was able to do, versus other situations. Even Captain Sullenberger, he said it took him 3.5 minutes to evacuate Miracle on the Hudson. The Japan Airline incident took 5 minutes, and that was an ideal scenario. So let's figure out what it takes so that those firefighters that are rushing towards that aircraft that needs to be evacuated, so that the cabin crew knows what it's going to take. And those two items are in this year's Senate version of the FAA reauthorization bill.
Okay. So let's stick with you for a minute, Senator. I know you haven't really had a chance to read this entire rule yet, but as someone who has heard from veterans around the country about transportation issues, what are your thoughts about today's announcement?
I think it's fantastic because the automatic violation piece is really important, and the requirement for training for handlers is really important. I've watched wounded warriors going to the National Wheelchair Games get dropped by the contractor to a major airline who was transporting them from their seat onto the aisle chair. And for many people who are physically fragile, that can result in an injury that will last for months or even require hospitalization. And when I've talked to the airlines, one of the major airlines actually created a position of vice president for disability affairs, and I said, well, what about, the back? She goes, oh, that's a contractor. That's not our airline. That's our contractor. And I said, well, you hired them. They should be required to meet these basic standards. And the poor people who are working minimum wage that are doing this, they want to know. They want to be trained. They're just as frustrated because they're getting wounded. They're getting injured with back injuries and all sorts of stuff. So that component is critically important. And that automatic damage is really important as well. Because, I mean, in November of last year, November 2023, let me just make sure I get this right. The airlines, because we forced them to report it, mishandled 892 wheelchairs and scooters in a single month. Imagine if the American public saw that the airlines broke 892 pairs of legs in a single month. There would be hue and cry, but there hasn't been. And so that automatic violation, I think, is really going to wake up the airlines, and the mandatory training is really critically important as well.
So, Mr. Secretary, and the Senator too, how can members of the audience, both here in person and virtually out there, how can they work with the Biden-Harris administration to make transportation more accessible?
So I'll begin with this rulemaking. Just here, and many of you are veterans of this, but some who may be following here or online are just getting to know the notice and comment system that we have. Which can take time, but it takes time in order to make sure that everybody's input is taken on board. A 60-day clock begins as this rule goes into the Federal Register. I believe it posted a few hours ago or late last night. So as that enters, that makes it possible for people to weigh in with their specific views, get it on the record, and that will be considered. So that's just a specific example in this particular context. Another thing I want to stress, though, is that while we're very proud of the federal funding through President Biden's infrastructure plan that we have available to us, most of the decisions about most of that funding are made closer to home in our system. Most of the dollars go out through formula to states, and even the discretionary projects that are selected at our department are projects that by definition, come to us from communities or states or transit agencies or airports. Out of the 45,000 projects and counting that we are funding through this infrastructure package, one thing that they have in common is 0 out of that 45,000 is something that we thought up at the US DOT headquarters in Navy Yard. The whole philosophy here is the ideas aren't going to come from Washington, but more of the funding should. What that means is it is important, and I know so many of you have national networks that can help put this thought to work. It is critically important to be engaging states, state legislatures, communities, transit agencies, and so often, unlike let's say a congressional proceeding where in order to testify you actually have to be invited, at a council meeting, which is often the authority that decides the priorities of a transit agency. Often anybody can appear and testify or have their input included. So please not only continue, as you have so effectively and so convincingly, to engage us directly at the DOT, to engage the administration through the Office of Public Engagement. But I would urge everybody who cares about these issues to make sure to have a voice in how those projects are first proposed, because I can tell you when they reach us and we see whether it's an idea for a safe streets proposal to make an intersection safer, or whether it's an airport terminal overhaul, it certainly matters to us according to specific criteria within the framework of the statute that we've written into those grant programs. It matters to us to know that they will make those places more accessible.
Senator?
I just want to second that comment, because it is really at the local level, and you have to influence at the local level, because oftentimes the decisions on, as the Secretary said, that what projects to go after are some of the obvious ones. Let's put in more wheelchair curb cuts, right? But for example, under the ASAP Act, when we talked about making transit stations more accessible, that may be having ticket machines that are accessible to somebody with a visual impairment or a cognitive impairment. It's not always just about wheelchair access. It's about full and total access. And so your local city council may just be thinking elevators and curb cuts, when really a quick fix for a major problem could be, a ticket machine. As we're going more and more to mobile apps, that make things a lot more difficult for folks. And really educating your local leaders on the range of things that need to be done through your lived experiences. I come from, a Midwestern state, and a curb cut isn't going to be enough during the wintertime when the snow piles up. So actually having a connection between the bus stop and the sidewalk and the road in a way that's elevated so that you're above. People don't think about that if they're not actually in a wheelchair trying to push through all that slush. So really that local advocacy is as ever critically important.
All right, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary and Senator Duckworth. Can you all give them a round of applause for... So I'm going to now move to the audience for some questions and comments. But first, I need to let you know that because this is a proposed rule, we are required to record your comments. And as Secretary Buttigieg mentioned before, you're certainly welcome. In fact, we encourage you to submit formal comments after you've had a chance to review the rule. And you can visit it at our website at transportation.gov and view the press release, which has the links to today's announcement. Or you can also visit the federalregister.gov. So we are joined here today by leaders representing diverse disability and health communities, veterans, people with disabilities, transportation workers, airlines, airports, airport associations. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and if you are able, and state your name, title, and the organization that you are representing when you're called on.
Hello, hi, Theo Brady. I'm Executive Director for the National Council on Independent Living, representing Centers for Independent Living and State Independent Living Councils and people with disabilities across the nation. Thank you, Senator, Secretary, and Kelly, of course. It is so refreshing to see people with genuine experience. And Secretary, I followed you long, I know that you're committed to all of this. And it's so, again, refreshing to know that you all have that lived experience, right? I was here about 8 months ago, and with the Vice President was here as well. And I recall sharing the reason I didn't fly anymore and I gave up flying was because too much damage to my chair, right? And I also testified that I knew that had an effect on my career path, right, to be able not to fly. And I also said that one of the most devastating things that happened to me was I couldn't go with my wife to Paris that was a dream vacation, and I couldn't go because she just didn't want me to go without being able to be mobile, because we has experienced so much trouble and damage to previous travels. And so I just gave it up. And I also testified that I didn't think this kind of stuff would happen in my lifetime. I thought that was okay though, because the next generation would benefit. And so I'm saying that is because I'm realizing maybe I will see it in my lifetime, right?
Yes.
And that is based on your commitment. It's based on many of the people here. And so I'm just really excited, because a lot of the stuff that you all are talking about here doing are really realistic stuff, right? And it should be done. And I'm so glad I might get a chance to see it. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I add something? I do want to add a caveat to that. I think this rule is going to be fantastic, and I commend the Secretary for taking this on, and it's going to be amazing when it's put into play. But we also need to understand that we need legislative fixes, because a future DOT could revoke this rule. And that's why, with our partners in the House, we need to work in a bipartisan way to enshrine many of these, many of the components of this rule into law for the future. This is going to be great as long as somebody doesn't revoke the rule.
Thank you for that. I remember you sharing your story last time, and it stayed with us. And look, you and advocates like you are why these things are happening sooner than many thought were possible. So thank you for your hand in that.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Tiso. I'm the president and CEO of Able South Carolina, based out of Columbia, South Carolina. So yay, Mayor Steve Benjamin. I just want to say thank you for elevating our voices, but also listening to us. We are overlooked often. And so just the amount of appreciation that I have is significant. And so thank you so much on behalf of our organization and the constituents that we serve. I do have a question around the training. Last night, I had some interesting experiences in the airport. I was called the scooter, and I was also told that I had to walk the jetway. And aging and a disability is a real thing, and I can't. They were really trying to force me to walk down the jetway, and I just stopped them and said, "You can't make me do that." But what is the training going to look like, and is it going to be training by the disability community, which is so significantly important? And so I could see Centers for Independent Living being a great partner with providing those trainings.
I'll turn to Kelly in a moment for a little more detail on how we see that fleshing out, but these are exactly the kinds of inputs that I think are important to get in the comment period as we're fine-tuning the rule. The other thing I want to mention that's important, and I'm sorry to hear this experience, and we've heard many similar horror stories, including a misunderstanding of ambulatory wheelchair users, others whose experience may not present in an obvious way to untrained staff as needing an accommodation, which is exactly why the training is so important, right? I want to mention that one thing that might sound like semantics, but what we know is very important, is that the standard that is in this rule is about safe and dignified access to air travel, and that both of those parts matter, physical safety and dignity in travel, and that needs to be reflected in the training as it's put together. I don't know, Kelly, if there's any more detail you might add to the training standards as they take shape.
No, I think you did well, but I do think, like as the Secretary said, it's important for you guys to provide us comments on what you think the training should look like. So I know that there's a number of people in the community and within DOT too that believe that the training is key to all of this, right? I mean, if the training is done correctly, a lot of these problems go away. And it's got to be both on the wheelchair side, handling your chair, but on handling your bodies as well. I mean, I think a lot of the general public is aware about the damage to our equipment, but I don't think there's as much awareness around how we get harmed. Senator's comment about how other things would be handled. Like, I think about like a plane crash. If you have a plane crash and someone gets injured, there's a whole team that goes out there and studies what happened, and they come up with recommendations so that it never happens again. But when we get hurt, none of that happens. So I think that's a difference too in how we're valued. So the dignified travel is a really important part, and it does become a standard with this rule. So thank you. Next question.
Thank you so much, Secretary. This is Alex Benowith, VP Government Relations for United Spinal Association. We represent people with physical disabilities. Really do appreciate all the work that all of you have done on this, a huge game changer for the whole disability community. But I just wanted to add a point about the training piece, and it is important to include OTs and PTs in that training, those individuals who know specifically from a medical perspective how to help with training of contractors. So I thought I just want to highlight that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Melanie Lendinel. I'm with the ALS Association, and I cannot tell you how long overdue this is and how much we appreciate you all focusing on this. One of the questions that I have is related to enforcement. As we know, just like a gym membership, it's only as good as its use. So one of the concerns that I have, and I'm hoping to hear more, is about what we can do to ensure that if this rule is in fact finalized, that there is strict enforcement of it to get the full benefits available to the community.
So that's been one of the key levers through all of the work we've been doing for passenger consumer protection. And we have a small but mighty team, and we're working with our partners in Congress to make sure that our consumer protection team is strong enough to follow up on all of the complaints that come in. Of course, our preference is that they do the right thing in the first place, and you don't need enforcement. But in order for that to happen, you have to have good enforcement. And the teeth in this proposed rule include fines up to a number that's a little over $100,000 per violation in order to make sure that the incentives are set up to have the proper training and have the proper procedures so that it doesn't get to that point. And if that fine sounds like a lot, I think it's important, again, to emphasize the impact that, for example, a damaged wheelchair can have on somebody for weeks or even months after the end of their trip. It is a lot more than just the value of the trip that you were on. It's part of why we think that can be appropriate. But we are committed to making sure that the department stands behind this rule with the enforcement authorities that we have. I would like to think over the last 2 years we've demonstrated that we're not afraid to use them to make passengers better off in a number of different contexts. And that'll certainly apply here too.
Hi, Larry Bram with Easter Seals serving DC, Maryland, and Virginia. This is all great. I'm wondering, however, when the next step is going to happen, which is air travel is the only mass transit where you have to get out of your chair. At what point is that, because that will solve a lot of the problems if you could just stay in your chair.
That is the holy grail, and we are working toward it, not just in a theoretical way, but with concrete steps, because we hear loud and clear the importance of getting to that point. As you mentioned, other methods of travel, other modes of travel have found ways to accommodate this, and that is what it would take to really not have these issues in the first place. Obviously, that's also a very challenging thing to do from a safety and engineering perspective. We don't view that as a reason not to look in that direction. We view it as a reason to take action. So in 2023, last year, the FAA began the research process to start putting some of those engineering and safety and technical bodies of research together to better understand what it would mean, what it would look like, what it would take. It would not be honest of me to suggest that we can do this rapidly or overnight, but I am sincere in saying that we view that as a goal that we are working toward and share that vision that it is the ultimate way to resolve so many of these challenges that wheelchair users face.
If I could add, Mr. Secretary, that is one of the issues that drew me to this work and to working at the department, is to reach that goal. So there is a 3-year roadmap, research roadmap that we published, and it's on the website. So you could go there and look at that, and it will kind of give you an outline of where we are headed with the research. So.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to stand up, sorry. Mr. Secretary, Senator Duckworth, my name is Carl Blake. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Paralyzed Veterans of America. I wanted to thank both of you for your leadership on this issue. I think it's no secret that this is one of our highest priorities. I appreciated the question that Kelly asked earlier about veterans and how this is, how they feel about this, I guess, ostensibly. Veterans with disabilities are people with disabilities. When one of our members reaches their destination in air travel, if their chair is broken, their experience is the same as any other person with a disability. I know you've heard the story of Charlie Brown, our past president. I think every time he flies, his chair is damaged. He's been personally injured. I have never met a PVA member, ever, who didn't have their chair damaged at some point. Of all of the issues that we work on, and we work on a lot in the VA, and you'd think there'd be plenty of complaints about the VA, the most common complaint we get is about air travel, because every time someone in our membership travels, something happens. Their chair is damaged, their person is damaged, their dignity is damaged. And that needs to change. The time for this rule passed a long time ago. It should have been done long ago. I appreciate Senator Duckworth, your point about codifying this. The urgency of this cannot be overstated. This has to be done. And anyone that would oppose it, I would challenge them to join us on one of our trips. You mentioned the National Veterans Wheelchair Games. Come with us to a big event where there are hundreds of wheelchairs and find out what that experience is like. This needs to get done. And then there was a point about enforcement. A rule with no enforcement is no rule at all. That is maybe the most important point of this entire rule. People need to be held accountable. There needs to be teeth in the enforcement of this. If you're going to do it, we need to do it right. So I thank you both for your leadership. Kelly, we thank you for your partnership in this over the years, and we look forward to getting this done.
Thank you, and thanks to PVA. You've been a terrific voice in this.
PVA has been really one of the strongest partners in all of these pieces of legislation that I've moved, and I thank you for that, because it shouldn't take a veteran to force something to happen, but having you there makes a big difference. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Colleen Flanagan. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm not special like any other wheelchair user. My wheelchair has been destroyed, and I appreciate you guys acknowledging how important I am to my family and my colleagues when my life is disrupted, so thank you for understanding that. I wanted to echo what Kimberly from South Carolina said, that the training is very important, but it has to be led by people with disabilities. That skill and that expertise and that lived experience cannot be duplicated. And I appreciate all that you're doing so that we can travel just like people without disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're going to bring this to a close. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. I believe that we're going to have some informal conversations and maybe some pictures with the Senator and the Secretary. So again, thank you, and we look forward to having some conversations with you in here.
Thank you, Kelly. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. So as Kelly mentioned, we will be taking photos with our amazing leaders here. If you could form a line here, we're going to do some group photos. First with our members of Congress, if you want.